Hey gang, I'm in Georgia today. I'm in Carrollton, actually, a small, very small town just outside of Atlanta, about an hour to the west, and we're driving through beautiful little farm country here. And actually what you're looking at is the farm land that was owned back in the day by Susan Hayward, famous actress, and this is probably a place where she spent many of her happiest days with her husband at the time. And here on the left is where she is buried. It's a church that she helped her husband, and they donated the land here, about 13 acres, to build this church called the Our Lady of Perpetual Help Catholic Church. So we're gonna go in. We're in, and let's pay respects and tell the story of Susan Hayward. Susan Hayward, one of the most famous actresses to come out of Hollywood back in the good old days, the golden age of motion pictures, all the big stars we remember back in the 20s and 30s and 40s and 50s. Susan was actually born Edith Mariner on June 30, 1917 in Brooklyn, New York, Flatbush. She was the youngest of 3 children, older brother and sister, and they were of Swedish descent and also Irish. Her grandmother, Catherine Harrington, was actually an actress from County Cork, Ireland. Now, it is said that Susan had a paper route when she was 12 years old, and she was the first one in the neighborhood to do that. Little would anyone know what was coming. Graduated high school in 1935. She was around 18 years old, and because color photographs were just coming into being, and she had starred when she was younger, in the play, everyone was taking notice even back then. She had her portrait actually appear 1937 in the Saturday Evening Post, and her picture was spotted. It was spotted by an assistant of David O. Selznick, famous producer I'm sure many of you know. And he was doing that movie, Gone with the Wind. You ever hear of that movie? It doesn't get any bigger. Humberto Melendez was passed a little over a year ago. Beautiful flower arrangement there for him. Yeah, so that's what kind of started it all. She went out to Hollywood with her sister. They paid for the trip, and her sister came home, and Edith stayed. She said, "I like it here. I'm gonna stay here." She did not get the role as Scarlett O'Hara. We all know Vivien Leigh got it, the famous British actress. But she stayed, and she got some bit parts. She was used for screen tests and received a contract actually at Warner Brothers. She was making $50 a week there. And that's when her talent agent, a guy named Max Arno, said, "Hey, we need to change your name to something like, let's try Susan Hayward. Isn't that something? You just make up a name and go. And the name becomes legend." Well, that was the name. That's how we know it today. So she began with those bit parts, as many start, Hollywood Hotel in 1937. The Amazing Dr. Clitter House in 1938. The Sisters. Movies most of us, or maybe all of us, have not heard of. But her first sizable role came with what would be a future president, Ronald Reagan, in the Girls on Probation. It was in 1938, and she was also in Comet over Broadway that year. But she kind of slid back, and she was she wasn't being billed, and she had regressed, like many on the borderline, to become what they called in those days the pin-up cheesecake publicity photo models, if you will, and they hated that. They despised it, as anyone would, but you're just biding your time. She was biding her time, and with her contract over at Warner Brothers, she moved on to the next studio, which would be Paramount Studios. Paramount Studios signed her to a contract, $250 a week. Not bad money in those days. And then she had her first significant breakthrough in the part of Isabel in the movie Beauguest in 1939. She was with Gary Cooper, Ray Milland. She started to take real notice, so they put her as the second lead in Our Leading Citizen in 1939 with Bob Burns, and then she supported Joe E. Brown, who was such an interesting character in $1,000 a Touchdown in 1939 also, and she kept going. She went to Columbia for some supporting roles, and she did work with United Artists and Republic. World War II came along, and she did what many did, sacrificed their time and went to Europe or the Pacific Theater. And Susan worked in the canteen, the Hollywood canteen, and she supported the war effort. In 1944, she met what she thought would be her lifelong soulmate, a guy named Jess Barker. He was a leading man, a handsome guy, and unfortunately, as her career began to pick up, his was kind of fading out, and you kind of know where this is going. They did have two sons in 1945 at the end of World War II, Timothy and Gregory, but this marriage was turbulent, to say the least. There was a custody battle, there was a divorce, and to say it got ugly would be putting it mildly. I'm going to back up here because I see the grave of a little boy. Little cute face. Let's pay our respects to James Theo Carrera. Look at those eyes. It says, "And a little child shall lead them." He lived from April 2014. He made it to his second birthday just through the summer, and then died in September, early fall. So sad. Rest in peace, little James. The cemetery is beautiful. It's small, it's simple, it's understated, but it's very serene here. Well, as we continue the story, her career really took off, and it really took off when producer Walter Wanger signed her, and he was a character in himself, by the way. I'm sure many of you know some scandal and some crazy stuff, shooting people, but I'm not going to get into it. But he signed her to a 7-year contract at $100,000 a year, which back in those days was big time. Her first film was Canyon Passage, 1946, and in 1947, She received the first of 5 Academy Award nominations that would kind of lead up to, yes, an Academy Award. So she went on, but then there was in June through August 1954, she filmed this. She was filming with John Wayne this movie called The Conqueror about Genghis Khan. And as some of you know, this would be a really bad place and a really insidious, well, let's just say it had insidious effects on everybody participating. She went through a little bit unrelated to that afterwards, a spiral. She did try to commit suicide because this horrible guy, Jess Parker was just beating the heck out of her mentally. And after a horrible argument where he just said some unthinkable, unspeakable things to her, to hurt her, she tried to overdose on sleeping pills. And she called her mom, luckily, just beforehand and said, hey, you'll be taken care of, I love you. And her mom called the police, so they were able to break in. She had done the deed, but they were able to get her to the hospital. And thank heavens, because, and I'm sure she afterwards said the same thing, because some great things, probably the best part of her life was coming. And it seems like, you know, when I think about it, you hear so many stories. When you're at the lowest of the low, that is the time that things turn around and you pivot, and karma and luck and situations, and then you begin the highs of your life. So, I mean, it's easy to say, but never give up. And that would start with her 1957 meeting of Floyd Eaton Shockley, who was a former FBI agent. He ran a car dealership, and together they're here. They donated this land, as I said, 13 acres of their farmland, all of this around here, and created this beautiful church, Our Lady of Perpetual Help Catholic Church. And they lived the life of, well, farmers. They said she would come into town driving a pickup truck, and she wasn't known as Susan Hayward here. She was known as Mrs. Shockley. So it was great. And that is when she hit the peak of her career. She starred in a movie called I Want to Live, and there she won the Academy Award. But then as life has its ups and downs and twists and turns, Floyd was becoming sicker and sicker, and sadly he died. Susan went into a very deep depression. She wore black every day, was not coming out of it. She was obsessed with Floyd. Of course, who wouldn't be? Your soulmate. She could not bear to live without him, so she sold this farm here. She left this area. She could not bear being here. Before she left, she designed what would be both of their tombs we're going to see, and the cemetery. And then, as he was the first to be buried here, the very first grave, she moved back to California. Her last movie would be in 1972 with William Holden, The Revengers. She was getting headaches all the time. It was like really weird. And then she got the diagnosis from the doctor. She had brain cancer. Now, going back to 1954 and 55, you know, when that movie, The Conqueror, she was with John Wayne, and oh gosh, just thinking back on it, there were a lot of stars. Agnes Moorehead, and this became a controversy. She died later. Remember from Bewitched? They all, well, a lot of them got, no one knew at the time, but they were shooting that movie, Snow Canyon, Utah, just a few miles from the town of St. George. It was only 130 miles downwind of what was the prior massive nuclear testing site of Yucca Flats in Nevada. And if you know anything about nuclear explosions, it's not only the explosion, but the radioactive fallout that you see, the mushroom cloud. Which way is the wind blowing? You don't want to be downwind of that, and they were. That land was completely contaminated. Of course, the government said, oh, it's safe. They assured them that it was safe. I'm going to put in a picture of John Wayne and his two sons. I saw this picture, and it really brought me chills because they're looking at a black box quizzically. And the black box is actually a Geiger counter going off the charts. And they were like, is this thing working right? And John Wayne kind of blew it off. And of course, we all know John Wayne died of cancer taking over his body. Many of those actors on that set, some of them died just within 3 or 4 years. Very sad story. We are here at Susan Hayward and Floyd's grave. Floyd Chalkley. It's a beautiful monument here. Some flowers. There, again, this was originally designed by Susan Hayward for her husband, and he was here for many years by himself. And when she later succumbed to the cancer, she came all the way back here, which is nice to be with him. And this is her stone. Susan Hayward Chalkley. It's a beautiful place here in the shade. Yeah, the cancer had spread all throughout her body from that terrible nuclear test site. They even had brought a lot of that soil back to the shooting grounds, the studios, if you can believe it. Probably contaminated a whole bunch of other people. The one thing that stands out for me for Susan Hayward was her absolute bravery in the face of death. Even though she had lost her beautiful red hair from chemotherapy, she had to wear a wig. She was partially paralyzed. She didn't look great. You know what happens after chemo. But she really wanted to go to the awards, and they had a slot for her with Charlton Heston to basically open the envelope and award the Best Actress Award, which is one of the two big awards, and she just was not going to miss it. She was going to make that presentation over hell or high water. So after all that, and not to mention that she was experiencing intermittent seizures, she was filled with meds. I don't know how anyone could have done it, but after all of that, she got up there. Charlton Heston helped her up on the stage and helped her down, but she did it. She had a brave face. She loved her Hollywood. After all that, she literally in the parking lot, she had a big seizure right outside the event, so it was downhill from there. Finally, Susan had a massive seizure that took her life. She was only 57 years old when she passed, very, very young. So Susan Hayward, hopefully resting in peace.